Hi, Tony. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, Brad. I see that you have turned on your camera, but it's given us a green screen. Would you disable your camera and re-enable it? And I think that seems to fix the green screen issue.
Did that work?
Unfortunately, no, we're still seeing, oh, there we go. Yes, we can see you now. Thank you.
I had the same problem with WebEx a couple nights ago. It took a little while for it to show.
Yeah, it seems to be clicking. It seemed to have green screen for a second there, but it seems to be gone now. So we'll see how it goes.
Good, thanks.
Brad, since we're just getting started, we are seeing the low bandwidth triangle on your profile. So just in case you drop off, you might want to turn the video off so you can stay connected to the call, to the meeting.
Okay.
Hi, Tom and Sherry. Would you like to test your microphone just to make sure we can hear you?
Testing, testing. Am I coming through?
Yes, you sound great. Thank you.
Hi, Tom. This is Sherry.
Hi, Sherry.
Hi, Ankur. Would you like to test your audio just to make sure we can hear you?
Hi, how you doing?
Thank you.
It is 6 o'clock, but I think we'll wait just a couple more minutes to see if we have any others logged in. Okay. I think we're gonna go ahead and get started. First of all, I want to welcome everyone. It is really great to see so many participants here this evening. I hope everyone's been doing well over the past few months, as I know we've all faced some challenging times lately, but it's really exciting that you're here joining us tonight for the Green Issaquah Partnership orientation. Tonight's meeting is going to consist of a PowerPoint presentation and then some Q&A. If you look in the chat box, I have posted the general schedule for tonight's meeting. We've set aside 90 minutes for this meeting. However, if we are able to close the meeting early, we will do so. Also, if you have to leave early, please feel free. We will be recording tonight's video or tonight's meeting, and we'll be posting the video on the City of Issaquah's Green Issaquah webpage. So also, if you know of someone who was not able to join us tonight due to a prior commitment, please feel free to share that link. Before we get started with the meeting tonight, I would like to go over just a couple logistics with you. Whether you have called in or are joining us via video, everyone should be muted at this time. Please do not unmute your microphone unless you've been called on to speak. We welcome you to use your video so you can see other participants during tonight's meeting. If someone is not on video, you'll see a circle with their initials or a phone number. We are only going to be using the chat while, we're only going to be using the chat box to indicate if you have a question or comment. So we kindly ask if you could please put question or comment into the chat box, and then we will call on you at the end in order in which people submit comments. When we call on you to speak, you may unmute yourself by pressing the microphone button or the space bar on the bottom of the tool or on the bottom of your keyboard there. Also, if you're on your phone, *6 may work to unmute. If you have any technical issues, please feel free to call in. And with that, I am going to quickly introduce Jeff Watling, our Parks and Community Services Director, to say a few words. Jeff?
Great, Jennifer. Thanks so much. Good evening, everybody. I too just am excited to see so many familiar faces, a number of new faces as well. Just great to see such a turnout. Welcome. You're going to have a chance to hear about some of the work that we've been doing these last several months with Forest Steward in preparation for this launch. And I think more importantly, have a chance to really hear about some opportunities and what this program is going to mean and opportunities ahead of us as a community. So excited that you're here. Really what this orientation is, in a lot of ways, you're on the ground floor of launching this Green Issaquah program. Some of the origins of this work really started with a lot of our community conversations as we were preparing the park strategic plan that was adopted in 2018. In that plan, a lot of the priorities were project-based, but we had a couple of operational strategies and operational priorities, and this being one of them, is how do we take the opportunity to enhance what we've currently been doing, what we've done historically in terms of stewarding our city-owned forested land. But how do we re-energize that or energize that with further volunteer opportunities? So exciting to see this coming together. Even in spite of the crazy year that we've had with COVID, this project has remained a high priority for Mayor Pauly and our city council. I so appreciate their support for this. You'll have a chance to, if you don't know about Forterra, you'll certainly have a chance to learn more about them as an agency. I've been lucky enough. It's probably been 18 years ago. I started working with, had an opportunity to work with then Cascade Land Conservancy, now Forterra. I think you'll find they're just a fantastic agency. It's so exciting to have them playing a more active role here in the Issaquah community and joining many of our partner agencies that have been around a long time. We have representatives from Mountains to Sound Greenway Trust. I see Lindsay and some staff or some members of Issaquah Alps Trails Club here as well. So we just consider Forterra another partner to come in and join the family and just reinforce some amazing work that's done here in the Issaquah community. So with that, thank you so much for being here. Along with Jennifer Fink, our park planner, Matt Meckler, our park operations supervisor, is here as well in terms of city staff. Matt, you want to say a few words and then turn it over to Forterra. Thanks again, everybody.
Sounds great. Thanks, Jeff. Hi, everyone. Yeah, I'm Matt Meckler. I'm our parks operations supervisor. My prior role in parks was the parks open space steward. So I did the open space stewardship of our open space land for about 10 years, and I see a few familiar faces of people I've worked with in the past. So, and I'm sure I'll be working with a bunch of you as we progress with this program. So it'll be really exciting. And with that, I'll turn it over to Joanna with Forterra.
Thanks, Matt. I'm going to go ahead and start the presentation and just tell you a little bit first about Forterra. Hold on one sec while I share the presentation. Hopefully that is showing for everyone. Okay. So again, my name is Joanna Nelson de Flores. I've been working at Forterra now for a little over 15 years. And Forterra has evolved over our 30 plus years as an organization. We're a Washington-based nonprofit that's dedicated to regional sustainability of its dimensions, so environmental, social, and economic. Forterra secures places across Washington's landscape that are keystone to a positive future. So what does that actually mean? Well, Forterra does a lot of different types of projects, everything from a traditional land conservation, land acquisition, to innovative policies, sustainable rural and urban development, even now expanding that to securing lands for affordable housing. And all of that work also includes ensuring that we have access to nature and healthy forested parks in our cities through our Green Cities program, which we'll learn more about today. So that's just a little bit about Forterra. I'm going to pass it off to our partner, Dan, with the Mountains to Sound Greenway.
Great, thanks, Joanna. For the folks that I don't know tonight, my name is Dan Hintz. I'm the Restoration Projects Manager with the Mountains to Sound Greenway Trust. Very excited to be here. Thanks for joining us. Yeah, as Jeff said, I mean, we're super excited to see more energy, more momentum when it comes to stewarding our lands here in the cities. So for those of you who are not familiar with the Mountains to Sound Greenway Trust, we're a nonprofit organization with a mission to lead and inspire action to conserve and enhance the Greenway, ensuring long-term balance between people and nature. Basically, that means we do our best to connect people to nature and steward the landscape. We've been around since 1991. The landscape on the map you can see there is about 1.5 million acres, and almost 2/3 of that is in public land ownership or in some sort of conservation easement status. And that's not by accident. That's, thanks to, local agencies like the city of Issaquah investing in land acquisitions and public land. That's thanks to organizations like Forterra, Trust for Public Land.
Just a second, Dan. You got muted, Dan. Just a second.
All right, sorry about that. I'm not sure where I got cut off there, but as I was saying, really lucky to have all this public land here in the Greenway. Was just designated as a national heritage area, the first in the Pacific Northwest, the 55th in the nation, which is also super exciting. Was just kind of turning to my personal, love of this community and connection to nature, really at the interface of the cities and urban areas with, what is a pretty vast, wilderness, however you want to define that. So Issaquah is also really the hub of a lot of our past restoration work, which I just have one more slide, Joanna, if you want to bump to the next one. While the launch of the Green Issaquah Partnership is, as I mentioned, another awesome, commitment by the city, there's been, 2 decades plus of work, really focusing on restoration along Issaquah Creek. That dates back to the late 1990s. Matt's been involved with those projects, some of my colleagues. It's really neat to see forests that were replanted 22 years ago really flourishing along the creek. A lot of that work is focused around salmon recovery. As I think a lot of you know, a huge part of our community here. But obviously the restoration, the forest provides so many other environmental, social and health benefits. We're currently working on in-stream large woody material restoration, so providing more habitat complexity in the creek itself, a big project at Lake Sammamish State Park. And that really complements other projects that the city has invested in, doing similar work in the stream and in the riparian buffer, the forest around the river. Great examples to go see that are at Confluence Park, at Squaw Valley North, and Salmon Run Nature Park. So that's just a really quick highlight. We've been working on almost 150 acres, including city land, state land, and a lot of private landowners. I see a few folks here that are part of our knotweed control campaign on Issaquah Creek, which is also fantastic, removing invasive weeds and planting native trees. So just really want to reiterate, we're super excited to be part of this partnership, really excited to see how this launches and takes off here. And with that, I think I hand it back to Jennifer to kind of get started formally with the orientation.
Great, thank you, Dan. I see we have a new attendee, Julia. Could you possibly mute yourself? I'm unable to do so. I think we're picking up a little background noise. Thank you very much. So for today, again, thank you all for joining us. The Green Issaquah Partnerships has some major learning objectives, and part of that is the purpose and structure and benefits of the Green Issaquah Partnership. We'll be discussing those today. We'll also be learning about the 5 important benefits to healthy forests in our city, components of a healthy forest, also basic best management practices for restoring a forest in natural areas. There's 4 different phases of restoration, and we'll be walking through those, as well as discuss different opportunities you'll have to help join the Green Issaquah Partnership. So the urban forest is all around us. It's in our streets, it's in our right-of-ways, it's in our backyards, it's on private property, it's in industrial and commercial areas, it's in school grounds, it's in parks and our open spaces. And in 2019, the city of Issaquah conducted an urban tree canopy assessment that reports Issaquah has a very healthy 51% tree canopy coverage citywide, ranking as one of the highest coverage rates here in King County. The urban forest is enormous, assets that support a high quality of life. And with such a large resource in Issaquah's urban forest, we need active management in order to keep these forests thriving. By enhancing the urban forest, we can preserve Issaquah's iconic beauty and increase the forest's benefits for the people who live, work, and play here. Benefits to healthy urban forests include many benefits, as you can see on the slide, and research indicates that urban forests and natural areas encourage a higher quality of life for people, create opportunities to improve physical and mental health, allow for enjoyment of nearby nature and provides numerous ecosystem services as well. The Green Issaquah Partnership has been established to focus on restoration and care of 1,540 acres of forested parks and natural areas owned and managed by the city of Issaquah. This makes up a large percentage of the forest that is all around us. The 51% tree canopy is so important that we care for it now before it declines. So for purposes of this program and presentation, when we talk about forests, we are talking about the forests and parks and natural areas that the city of Issaquah owns and manages. But this is not all of our park space. We have developed several goals, objectives, and benchmarks for the Green Issaquah Partnership Program. But one of the big one is to restore all 1,540 acres by year 2040. This will help us reach the following outcomes: improve urban forest health, increase livability and quality of life, actively engage the Issaquah community. I am now going to pass it over to Dan from Mountains to Sound Greenway to talk a little bit about what a healthy forest looks like. Dan?
Great. Thanks, Jennifer. So the next handful of slides, we'll talk about a healthy forest. And this could be an hour-and-a-half presentation on its own. And I do believe that there's going to be great opportunities over the next year to engage in more specific topics around forest restoration and forest health. Forest health is a term that gained a lot of popularity in the early 90s, and there's still a lot of research, what does that actually mean? And it really can vary a lot based on what your management objectives are. Are you managing for timber? Are you managing for wildlife, like the spotted owl that needs old growth forest? Or obviously I mentioned just a bit ago about salmon and forest along our rivers. Obviously water resources are essential and connected to forests. We're very close to the Cedar River watershed that might manage their forests differently to make sure that, our water resources are secure in the region. Stormwater management, you're more and more hearing urban forest as a type of green stormwater infrastructure. So actually looking at it as a physical component that really ties into stormwater management. Carbon sequestration, there's more and more projects looking at developing credits for tree planting and restoration or preservation. Recreation, of course, a big one in our community, trails, roads, we want to balance, protecting our environment and our forests, but also making sure people can connect to them because that's the only reason they're going to, hopefully care about them. So often the answer is going to be some form of all of the above. And that's something that I encourage you all to kind of think about when we're looking at our forests and talking about our forests. So the next few slides, we'll really look at a few common themes and structures within our forests that hopefully you can kind of pick up on next time you're out in the woods. Joanna, next slide. Okay, great, thank you. So starting kind of top down at the overstory, or you might hear it as the canopy. This is really important for, especially in a city, for shade, for cooling. I just mentioned the benefits for stormwater. So our trees act kind of as a big umbrella, intercepting rain, slowing that down. The soils act as a sponge to make sure that water is more slowly released into our stream, especially in the summer when we have our drought and need that water for fish. Obviously prevent erosion. So really that forest structure starts up top with big trees that some of you might be familiar with, like Western red cedar, Douglas fir, Western hemlock are some of our really iconic evergreen trees, big leaf maple and red alder, some of our deciduous trees that you see as well. So moving down, we'll get to the mid-story, or really kind of that in-between level. I think you can think about certain species in the mid-story that might only grow 20 or 30 feet tall, like our vine maple or our beaked hazelnut, serviceberry are good examples. I think another thing that's really important when it comes to forest health to look at in the mid-story is what is regenerating in terms of what will hopefully become our next tree canopy or overstory components. So a lot of our forests, especially in more urban areas, are really depleted soils. You don't necessarily see trees regenerating naturally. It's really neat that in a lot of places, Tiger Mountain areas in Issaquah, you actually do see that. So when you see that big 100-foot tall Douglas fir tree, see if there's 10-foot tall western red cedars, the next trees that like to come up, later succession trees is what you might hear a term in ecology, that like that shade. They're kind of that next cohort of tree canopy. And then moving down, we get to the forest floor or the understory. This is kind of my favorite part of the forest, or I think at least a very maybe underappreciated part of the forest. We have lots of ground covers, small shrubs like salal or Oregon grape or sword fern. I think you can see thimbleberry kind of on the left side of this picture. These are plants that provide huge diversity, and if folks are familiar with the term ethnobotany, it's really cultural, medicinal, or use in cooking for a lot of our plants. And I feel like that's where you really find a lot of the really cool, actual practical uses of some of our plants at the understory level. As a restoration ecologist or a practitioner, I also think the understory provides maybe the most creativity in the restoration in terms of what you might want to plant, and really, kind of look at this cool assemblage of species you can do to attract pollinators or berries, if you are more into the harvesting side. So that is the above ground part of our forest that most of us observe and kind of look about when we're hiking. But really, what is so crucial is the soil. It gets forgotten about sometimes. It is literally the structure or foundation that supports our forest. It provides nutrients, water, that's mineral material, that's organic material. There's just so many microorganisms that you might not even be able to see in our soils that are essential for forest health. Fancy term, mycorrhizae, are a type of fungi that interact with plant roots, and they feed off the plant sugars, but in return they're providing gases and nutrients like nitrogen that trees might not be able to access on their own. So that activity under the ground is someone who's really passionate about botany. Sometimes it seems like the outer space to me. I wish I understood it better, but it is so important, and we have a lot of depleted soils that that is a big part of the restoration, as well as getting rid of the invasive weeds and planting trees. So then, kind of looking at that big picture, we'll talk about diversity, healthy forests and forest diversity. That is what we've talked about. Maybe structure, age of our forest is really important, and also types of species. Throwing in a few fancy, quote unquote, fancy terms or ecological terms, but you'll hear functional redundancy a lot when it comes to diversity. And that's really saying is like the more different species you can have out there, the more resilient that forest can be. If you have a forest of only Douglas fir, and let's say there's an insect or a disease that is specific to Douglas fir, you're at risk of losing a whole forest potentially. But if you have other species that kind of complement each other, that forest is more resilient to diseases and climate change and other, problems that can really impact our forest. So I think there's a lot of different ways to think about diversity. I mean, we are just scratching the surface about thinking about genetic diversity of our trees and forest as well, and what that means for replanting and restoration efforts. So really, really neat. This is a great picture that kind of shows, those developing canopy conifers, some of those mid-story shrubs, and lots of great kind of understory fruiting little shrubs there as well. And lastly, when these trees die, they don't stop, providing function in our forest. Dead wood is essential. And as we mentioned with soils being maybe depleted of organic material, it can take all of a year to get rid of inches of soil, whether it's erosion or other land use. It can take hundreds of years to create that soil back. Luckily, we live in a pretty lush environment where that happens a little bit more quickly than, say, the desert Southwest, but it still takes a long time for that organic material from needles, leaves, branches, and of course, big trees to start breaking down in the forest. Those snags provide habitat for birds, for insects. And I love this picture of two nurse logs that I think are old Western red cedars that were probably logged 100 years ago that are providing organic material for huckleberries and Western hemlock to kind of grow through them. So really important to think about. I had that tendency growing up, as you pull all the wood out of your forest, you clean that up, and where you can allow that, having that dead wood, having those down branches are really, really important for our forest as well. So that was really fun to talk about forest health. I think I hand it over to Matt next for maybe a little more sobering reality of invasive species and threats in our forest. So I think you're up next, Matt.
Thanks, Dan. Yeah, we do have a lot of threats to our urban forests that we have to kind of work around. A lot of those are pointed out on the slide, and I'll kind of go over some of those. The fragmentation and development. Through development, often large trees are removed and replaced with fewer, smaller trees that fit better in the landscapes. And then as we also develop the land, it breaks the forest into fragments too. So that's one challenge. Climate change, we all have seen some effects of that with the hotter summers, wetter winters, and just the changing of the growing conditions. It stresses out a lot of our trees that we have and other native plants, which makes them more susceptible to disease and die off. And then with that hotter summer and the disease and die off, we also have the risk of wildfires as a growing concern, and just making sure residents are familiar with the fire-wise practices and to be safe around their homes and what to do. And then, like Dan mentioned too, we have lots of invasive species, both plants and insects that can threaten our forests and our natural areas. And then disease too, that can affect both the plants and the trees in our open space. And then as native trees struggle to regenerate, trees are impacted by the invasive plants prior to land use. So a lot of times they're engulfed by blackberries, or this picture shows ivy growing up a tree, which can eventually take over a forest and deplete the understory of all those critical things that Dan was talking about. And all those things are really important for our forests, for the seeds of the firs to get started, or other trees, and just plants in general. And then there's the harmful use too. There's just social trails, or off-leash dogs, or illegal dumping can impact our forests. And the lack of homeowner education and resources. A lot of times people don't realize what to do or how to care for the land that's adjacent to their home or maybe behind their home. We've seen instances where you're doing some yard work and people just think, well, it's all green, it's natural, I'll just dump it over the fence, not realizing that some of that plant material they dumped over the fence is actually an invasive plant that can totally take over a forest. And we've seen that with it's called yellow archangel, which can completely take over an understory and really deplete that. So that's one thing. Like to just more homeowner education is important. And then of course resource limitations on our urban forests and public lands. We all thought that these could just take care of themselves throughout time, but now we know it kind of takes active management to really take care of those and to get those ecosystems to work correctly. Ready for the next slide? Yeah. So Dan covered a lot of this, some of the native plants and then invasive plants. So, the Green Issaquah Partnership is mostly focused on the threat of invasive plants in our forested and natural areas, and then also building resilient forests. So this slide here kind of provides a lot of those, both native plants and invasive plants. And we see a lot of those western red cedar, Doug fir, the sword ferns. Those are great pictures that we saw on some of the previous slides. And then in the next couple slides, we'll see some of the other things, the invasives that are taking over or can take over some of our natural areas. So we have Himalayan blackberry, English ivy, knotweed, those things. So a lot of times, if left unchecked, these plants will just completely overwhelm a forest. And this is a great example right here of, believe it or not, those mounds that you see there are actually trees that are just completely covered with, it looks like ivy there, and they'll completely, deplete the understory, and nothing else can grow in there. So, but there is hope, though.
Are you there?
This is the same.
I'm here. I'm actually on a Zoom meeting, but that's all right. I'm just listening into that. No, this is one with the city.
Mary, could you please mute? Thank you.
And Julia, could you please mute as well? We're capturing some noise from you as well.
All right. Well, like I said, there is hope, though. Through restoration efforts, we can reverse that trend of all those invasives taking over. That picture that you just saw with those really crazy mounds of ivy, this is the same site, a few years later, after volunteers removed all the ivy and blackberry and then replanted with the next future of healthy forests. And then as time goes on, those restoration areas will eventually turn into, a healthy forest and mature forest. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Joanna to talk a little bit about the Green City Partnerships and the programs here in Issaquah.
Thanks, Matt. Hold on. Okay, so Issaquah is at an important moment right now when it comes to managing their forested parks and natural areas. We have the opportunity to protect these places and address a lot of these challenges, specifically the invasive plant challenge, now before it gets far worse. So I'm going to share with you some of the results of a forest assessment, and you'll see the current state. But I just want to start off with sort of the trajectory that can happen if we delay this work. If we do nothing to address the pressures and problems facing our urban forests and natural areas, we risk losing this very important community asset. If we don't work to control the invasive plants now, they'll continue to outcompete the diverse vegetation and diminish all of those components of a healthy forest that Dan went over with us. So this is a bit of a dramatization, but this is sort of, if you could see what would happen over 20, 50, and 100 years. So we really lose all of those benefits, all of those ecosystem services that Jennifer talked about, and those components of a healthy forest. But as Matt said, there is some hope. There's been a lot of work done in Issaquah to date, and there's been a lot of work done across the region to reverse this trend. And we do know that we have the opportunity now to basically help prevent this problem from getting worse, because the longer we wait, the more expensive it will get and the more time and effort it will take. So through restoration, through removal of invasive plants, and also doing what we can to build those healthy components of a healthy forest, we know that we can reverse this trend and ensure that we have the healthy forests into the future. So that's really the beginning of the Green City Partnerships. So there's many cities across the region that are experiencing the same thing. And so the Green City Partnership program was formed to help improve urban forests and natural areas, galvanize an informed community to support those forests, and ensure that this is a long-term effort. This is a sustainable effort, that it's not something where we just restore an area, plant trees, and walk away, that this is an investment that we are dedicated to. So I just wanted to go over what the Green Cities program as a whole has been doing over the past 15 to 20 years. So we started the program in 2005 with the city of Seattle. Soon after, many other cities were interested in doing the same thing, recognizing the same thing that Issaquah has, that these natural areas and parks are really important to our quality of life and an important asset to manage. So since 2005, we've established 15 green cities and 14 green cities, 1 county. Snohomish County has also recently joined, establishing a program for their parks as well. Combined, I want you to see that the work happening in Issaquah is part of a much larger regional effort. And so combined, our goal is to have a regional, sustainable, connected, healthy forested parks and natural areas and urban forests throughout the region. To date, there's been about 1.3 million volunteer hours that have gone into all of these programs combined, and represent about 13,000 acres of forested parks and natural areas throughout the region. So a couple elements that all of these programs have in common is that they are what we refer to as community-based stewardship programs. So that means we engage people like you to get involved in their local parks and natural areas to help with this work. We do this through a Forest Steward program, which we're going to talk a little bit more about, but these are folks that raise their hand and sign up to be sort of super volunteers, or folks that adopt their park and help lead restoration efforts in future years when COVID passes and gets a little better, we envision, a lot more community building around this program and opportunities for community members and neighbors to get together and do this kind of work with their local forest steward. It's also a great opportunity to engage schools. We're interested in engaging the local schools here in Issaquah, and also universities, colleges, folks that either need service hours or service learning opportunities, and we can do that with opportunities right here in Issaquah. There's also a great opportunity to involve local businesses and other regional corporations to get engaged in this work and to support it both either through sponsorship or through big employee work parties. Now, volunteers alone can't get all of the work done. Professional crews are needed for tough projects. So things like steep slopes, critical areas, places where it makes a lot more sense to send a crew in to maybe brush cut some blackberry, and then volunteers can follow up and dig out the roots. We also don't allow volunteers to use power equipment or apply herbicides. So in some cases, herbicide is actually the best management practice and used only for specific weeds. So we do think that this program will need to also support professional crews and employment opportunities to do this work. So when we talk more specific, those are all some things that the Green Cities program have in common, and more specifically for the Green Issaquah Partnership, this is sort of where we're at and what we originally envisioned as a 2-year startup. There's been a little bit of a delay with some of the recent events, but the city had secured some resources, part of it through a grant with King Conservation District. They've also identified the partners early on, folks that had already been doing some of this work in the city. We also walk you through sort of the forest assessment and how we determined what areas of the city would be included. And then we're in the current process, the final stretch of a 20-year plan or a 20-year guide that will help with the implementation of this program. So that is expected to be published and hopefully out and posted by the end of this year, if not early next year. And I know several people in this room have helped review and provide input on that, and we really appreciate it. So where we're at in the stage right now is establishing this community stewardship program that will sort of be a part 2 after this for folks that are interested in becoming a forest steward, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. So first, I just wanted to go over the forest assessment. So part of this whole process, in order to manage the forested parks and natural areas and think about where we needed to be strategic, we had to understand the baseline conditions and the current state of the forested parks and natural areas. So we worked with the city and identified all of the park sites that have forest and natural area on that. And that was about 38 different park sites. And within that, so we started out with about, I think it was a little under 1,700 acres. And then once we did the assessment, we removed things like if there was a park that was included that had natural area, we did not include obviously the parking lot or other developed parts of the park. So the green that you're seeing on this map identifies where those forested and natural areas are. So out of that, all of those park areas that were assessed was about 1,540 acres of forested park and natural area. And those is sort of what defines the efforts of the Green Issaquah Partnership at this point. There's really great news. I got to see the rankings of about these 14 other cities, and this is some of the best results I've seen. So I really want you all to realize, as I said, this is a really important opportunity right now. More than 3/4 of the forested park and natural areas that were surveyed have low invasive cover. So that means 5% or less. So that's really, really great. And then the remaining is in the medium to high. So somewhere between 5 and 50%, or high, which is 50% or more. I will say that we worked with a contractor called American Forest Management, someone that Forterra has worked with and has done the same forest assessment for all the other cities. It is a rapid forest assessment. It's kind of what makes it possible to go through this amount of land. So it's still pretty high level information, but it's just the right amount of information, we think, to help guide efforts and be strategic about where we work. So what we do is we take this invasive plant cover information and we overlap it with some other criteria around tree composition or forest composition. This is where it starts to get fun. So in this matrix, we basically divide all of the 1,540 acres into different management units. And then each of those management units, they take a lot of information and they assign it a category. On the bottom here, we have invasive cover. That's what I just talked about, right? The low, medium, and high invasive cover. So low is less than 5% and high is 50% or more invasive cover. Here on the other axis, we have forest composition or tree composition. And that's also rating, breaking it down into 3 different categories: high, medium, and low. And if you can see the details on that, it starts to get a little bit more complicated. But essentially, we're looking at where is there 50% or more canopy cover is evergreen, more than 25% native tree cover, down to low, which is less than 25% native tree cover, and in between. So with that, all of these numbers on this matrix indicate the number of acres that fit each of these categories. So in the very top, I'm not sure if you can see my cursor, the very top, the 521 acres, those are your very, very best, your high value, healthy, mature, for example, evergreen trees, and very low invasive cover. The dark purple, the 72 acres, that is your kind of your worst condition, right? So that's where you have very low tree composition value or forest composition value and very high invasive cover. So then we apply these to maps and we can see across the different parks where these different, what we call triage categories fall. And so there might be a tendency to run to the dark purple, those 72 acres that are sort of the worst of the worst, but we kind of figure those may not get that much worse. Where we really want to focus our effort is maybe in these top tier. So the acres that have really high value forest composition with high to medium invasive. Let's protect those first so they don't get worse and we don't lose our big trees, and so on. The whole idea is basically to move all of these acres over time into this high value, low invasive threat category. So hopefully that makes sense. There'll be time for some questions afterwards if you want, but we have maps of all of the parks and using this categorization. Obviously, there's also a lot more data that the forest assessment provided. I'm going to walk through a little bit of that to tell a little bit more of the story. This data here shows us what the first, second, and third most abundant tree species that were found across all those 1,540 acres. So Douglas fir was the most dominant species found, almost half of the acres surveyed. Overall, 55% of the areas surveyed were dominated by evergreen native conifer trees. So that's great. That's actually an indication of pretty healthy forest. Those are our long-lived species. They live, many of you probably know, live for 300 to 500, maybe even more years. So they continue to just provide us with all those benefits. And then deciduous trees are also very helpful. They help build those soils that Dan was telling us is so important with all the organic matter that they drop their leaves in the forested parks, natural areas. one thing to consider is that they are shorter lived, generally shorter lived trees. Maybe 100, a big leaf maple might be able to live up to 200 years, but they're generally considered short-lived trees. And of all the deciduous trees, 75% of these trees were between 50 and 99 years old. So a lot of them are reaching the end of their lifespan. Again, I'm just showing you some extra data to go along with this slide. But some of this, all this information will come out in the 20-year guide. Next, we move to what we're calling here the understory. Is really a combination of the mid-story and understory that Dan went through. It's a similar graphic. It's showing the plants that were first, second, and third most abundant found in each of the management units. So in this case, we have a lot of sword fern, salmonberry, Indian plum were the top. And these are just a number, sort of a list of some of the plants that were found. These are the top occurring ones, and there were really about 25 species found in all. Again, these are rapid assessments, so they're not out there detailing necessarily, inventorying super detailed every single plant that they see. These are meant to give us a general idea of the plant composition out there. But what we can see is that it's fairly diverse, and that's a good indicator, again, of health. Within the invasive species, Himalayan blackberry was by far the most abundant. And that's interesting. The blackberry is a much bigger problem here than, say, English ivy, but it is, it's still, in comparison to Seattle, for example, where English ivy is probably the #1 invasive plant. So when we do see English ivy, we should be sure and make sure we pull it, because we want to make sure that that doesn't establish. Going to move on. Also, herb Robert was noted to be pretty abundant as well, which is an herbaceous invasive geranium that spreads by seed. And so those are things to be on the lookout as well. So those are some of the results of the forest assessment. I'm going to walk you all through some really basic best management practices. We're not going to get into great detail, but we certainly will cover that more in depth for any further training with forest stewards. So we like to break it down. Some might say it's a bit simplified, but we like to break it down into 4 phases of restoration. Let me walk you through these 4 phases. This is also how we track and monitor the restoration projects. So phase 1 is the initial invasive removal. So that means we're really taking the time to dig out the roots of the blackberry and ivy. This could mean cutting ivy off of trees. And it's the biggest investment of time. So this could, depending on the state of a particular area, could be an investment of around 400 volunteer hours or person hours per acre. I always think that's also the most fun. A lot of people really love phase 2, which is planting and also weeding. So before we go back, if you remove an area of blackberry and ivy, the soils need to rest a little bit. Sometimes we wait a year or more before we go back and plant. So when we go back, we want to make sure we catch anything that's come back, and then do some planting. And this is a great activity for volunteers as well. But you'll see hand weeding is greatly reduced in time if we stay on top of it, right? So what took maybe 400 hours per acre might only take 40. And then fall planting as well. After we planting, we want to make sure we take care of those plants. We want to nurture them. This could take several years, depending on the site. It could take 3 to 5 years if it really takes a long time for these plants to establish. So again, it's a lot of weeding, mulching, in some cases watering. And the final phase is sort of the forever phase. We never really say that an area has been restored or that it's done, because there's always a responsibility to continue to revisit those areas. But again, at this point, the investment of time, if we can stay on top of that, maybe we go back to a site every year, or at some point every 5 years, just to make sure things are looking good, that no further treatment is needed. And that might be around 5 hours per acre. So in order to track the program, we'll also want to make sure that we're measuring performance. So we're having sign-in sheets and making sure we're tracking everybody's hours so we can report out annually. In addition to what groups like Mountains of Sound Greenway have been doing, this will be citywide. All volunteer efforts with forested parks and natural areas will be tracking. We also will be tracking with work logs, the type of work that's been done, how many plants have been installed, how many acres of ivy or blackberry have been removed. And so we can report this all in fairly real time, and we'll rely on our volunteers for supporting us with this, because it's really important to show success. So every year we can come back and say, hey, here's where we have a goal. This was our annual goal this year. Here's where we're at, and here's how the program is progressing. So that 20-year guide has a set of benchmarks and a timeline for getting all of these 1,540 acres enrolled by 2040 in the next 20 years. And we also want to make sure that this is a long-term investment. That, again, folks know that this isn't something we can just do overnight. So I said that your forests are in fairly good condition, but there still are around 350 acres that are in need of pretty significant restoration. And that's still a significant investment. And we also need to make sure that we do the maintenance and monitoring of those areas that are in pretty good shape now to make sure they don't revert back. So managing a forest and this really important asset does take money. It's going to take all of us coming together and many, many helping hands. So the whole idea around the Green Issaquah Partnership is that we're working together. As mentioned, the City of Issaquah, Forterra is really honored and excited to be part of this. Mountains of Sound Greenway has done so much work, as well as other groups like Issaquah Alps Club, and there's been some volunteers as well. And so we're really hoping to bring all of those groups together, work with other nonprofits and agencies, schools, businesses, and of course also landowners, really trying to provide some education and educational resources for folks that live adjacent or near parks so they can also be good stewards of their land. So with that, we're going to transition to talking a little bit about how you can get involved, especially during this time of COVID, and sort of what some current opportunities are and expectations coming for the new year. So I mentioned the Forest Steward program. We probably have over, excuse me, 300 forest stewards across all of those green cities. Excuse me. I might need somebody to take this up.
I'll take it over for you there, Joanna. Get a drink. So yeah, this is going to take a lot of hands for us to get this moving forward. Some of our volunteer events were expected to, Joanna, when you get a chance, if you could advance the slide for me. Some of these volunteer events are going to expect to transition into 2021. There are some things we're going to have to do, obviously in regard to COVID and social distancing and all of that. But we're going to start with some very small events with some pre-registration required, wearing face coverings, maintain social distancing. We're not sharing tools. You'll be required to bring your own gloves and snacks. And of course, if you're symptomatic, we will have to ask you to refrain and come join us when you're feeling better.
Jen, this is Jeff. If we can continue with the tag team fun, Joanna, if you want to go back to the steward slide, I can touch on some of those bullets. a little bit more, just talk a little bit about that. Oh, one more. This is great. Thanks, everybody.
Oh, did I skip that? I'm sorry.
It's okay. 2020,
Thank
right?
you.
It was all about improv. So
Thanks.
yeah, just a little bit about the Steward program, as Joanna was saying, and I can speak a little bit of experience from a jurisdiction I came. This idea of, I think as Joanna said earlier in her presentation, a sort of an Uber volunteer, a super volunteer. Part of the backbone of this community-based work is getting volunteer stewards, and those stewards would, in essence, work with us to adopt a forested space, an area. And as Joanna was sort of laying out the triage area, right, that work helps us identify strategically what acres feel like they're most important, and we'd work with the volunteer to identify that space that they would steward. That steward would then help with networking, awareness, would begin to do their own volunteer recruitment, and in essence, create volunteer opportunities within that space. We would then support, Forterra, the city would then support that effort with trainings, with crew assistance, with equipment and materials. Some of the excitement or interest in a program like this is perhaps we, the city, find a volunteer to get us a bunch of tools and equipment, and we also maybe get a trailer. And so whenever a steward's hosting a volunteer event, we bring the equipment. So this idea of recruiting stewards is really a backbone to the program. Joanna, how you doing? Okay. Next slide. I think we covered some of those realities. Great. Joanna, do we want to just talk next steps and open this up for Q&A?
I'm back. I'm so sorry. How embarrassing. It's funny that I mentioned COVID and then I just start coughing uncontrollably. I have had a cold and the coughing fit just started. Thank you for filling in. Now I know my face is all red, but yeah, you did an excellent job, Jeff. Thank you for covering all of that, and Jennifer. The next steps are pretty important, so please do stay informed. You have the opportunity to join the Green Issaquah Partnership email list that we're going to be starting. So we'll probably be sending out quarterly to monthly updates, especially letting folks know when volunteer events are coming back on board. And then also about becoming a forest steward. So we have a survey oh, here it comes. A survey started that I think Jen is going to put in the chat. Please fill that out and let us know if you're interested in being a forest steward and maybe what park you're interested in as well. Because we're planning to do a follow-up, smaller training with more detail on that program. If you have any questions, you can also reach out to me at greenissaquah@forterra.org. It's an email that will come to me and I'll be able to answer any questions that you might have. My sincere apologies. This did not happen in the practice. Sorry. With that, I think we can open it up to questions.
Yeah, questions and discussions. If anyone has a question they would like to ask of staff or Joanna, please in the chat, open your chat box and just type in chat or question and we will call on you. Please in the order in which they are listed. Yes, I see Laura posted in the chat. Can you share this report, and if so, when might it be available? We are in process right now of doing some final edits on it. Joanna is going to hopefully have it to the editor for reproduction here soon, and we hope it will be available close to the end of the year, if not 1st of January for the public. And yes, we will be posting that on our city website, on the Green Issaquah website for everyone to download. Got another question here. Brad, Book, I see you have a couple of questions.
I do. Thanks, Jennifer, and thanks to everybody for the presentation here tonight. My first question actually is probably either for Dan or Matt, and that is out of curiosity. What is the general survival rate of plants when you do restorations? You know, so much of it, it would sure be nice if that survival rate is pretty high, and it would be a good motivator for everybody that gets involved. But what actually do you find in the field? Dan?
I can start and see if Matt has anything to add or different opinion, but of course, the kind of the cop-out answer is it varies pretty widely. You know, based on species, based on where your project is, based on presence of invasive species. So if I put a number just very kind of broadly there, I'd say, you know, we're generally shooting for 75% survival within the first, you know, couple of years. And I think that's something that's really important to remember too. It's those first 3 years with our native plants where they're by far the most vulnerable. So you get trees in the ground, they are really just trying to establish roots and adapt to their native soils where they've been, you know, outplanted from a pot and have been cared for in a nursery before that. That's when they're small and the weeds can really overgrow them and really outcompete for sunlight, water, nutrients. So, I mean, you do unfortunately see the highest survival, and it is really kind of what the level of investment on maintenance is. And I'll say personally, as someone who manages a lot of projects that are maybe funded for 2 years or 3 years through a grant, having a program like Green Issaquah to do that maintenance, to come out and mulch, to water, to weed around those trees in the first few years can really, really help increase survival. So yeah, somewhere in the 75% range. I mean, really good sites, if you can water, mulch, and really stay up on top of the maintenance, you can get that higher. Sites where you're planting and maybe not getting out to, you might see 50 to 60% survival. I will say to an extent, we overplant to prepare for some of that sort of, you know, for some of that mortality. And, you know, I mean, there is something to be said about, you know, the competition within the native plants themselves. You know, I mentioned very briefly genetics, but there is something to be said about the trees that can kind of get through those tumultuous first few years, you know, being the ones that are maybe going to be more resilient for, you know, 100 years or more for some of our, you know, long-lived conifers. So hopefully that kind of gets at what you're asking for there, Brad, and maybe Matt has a few other thoughts on it too, but.
It does, Dan. Thanks for a lot of good points. And actually, I think it's encouraging that you can have a 75% survival.
I'll really stress the maintenance investments, and I think that's what's so cool about this Forest Steward model to better support the maintenance needs for projects, which is, you know, always kind of underfunded. So,
Matt, do you have anything to add on that?
Well, I think Dan covered it pretty well, but I know just from my experience, you know, I think we've seen probably even some higher survival rates down on the valley floor where we tend to have better soil conditions. I know in some of the restoration sites that I've worked on in partnership with Mountains of Sound, or just some of the ones that we've done in the city, you know, Park Point, a great example. We've had some great successes out there. Salmon Run or Salmon Cove, we've had great success out there. And again, all the kind of the lowland floodplain soils really help those trees and plants out a lot. So
more good news.
Yep, exactly.
Thanks, Matt, thanks. My second question is actually for Joanna, and it really relates to if you could talk just a little bit about what kind of partnership or communications go on with more regional lands that seem to be adjacent to most of our parkland, you know, so the county and the state. Could you talk about how this might influence what they do as well?
Yeah. Well, first off, King County has used the same forest assessment tools called the Forest Landscape Assessment Tool. They have the same information for their forested parks and natural areas and have similar goals. We've talked about making them a green county at some point as well. So I think that they share common goals, and that's really wonderful. I will say, in all honesty, one thing we do need to focus on is the areas that are funded by the city, that those dollars for this program do go to the city managed properties, but this partnership allows an opportunity to work closely with these agencies. So I think that we can cross-pollinate and hope that, if there are opportunities going on at the state park as well, that we can cross-promote those things. People going out to events to support the state park is obviously going to lead to better education and understanding and opportunities to support some of the other sites. So the state park was not included in the forest assessment, again, because we were focused on the city-owned properties. But we do have examples of that in some of the other cities as well. And we've sort of listed them as partner agencies that we want to build a relationship as part of the partnership in the guide as well. So I'd be also really open to feedback, and I think it'd be great to have contacts to start some of those relationships. I know the city already has a lot in place, and same with Mountain Sasan Greenway, but expanding that would be wonderful.
Thank you for that.
To our adjacent, private property landowners as well. It's like if everyone's good stewards to the land adjacent to parks, then it's just going to make this job a lot easier.
Thank you, Joanna. That's it for me, Jennifer.
Great, thanks, Brad. Lindsay, did you want to read your question?
Sure. Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay, great.
Yes, go ahead.
So my question was just how best have nonprofits in other cities who have partnered with Forterra in this way, how have they best supported their green city partnerships? Because we are definitely interested in doing that in any way that we can at the Issaquah Alps Trails Club. So I would just love maybe some anecdotal examples of some other nonprofit orgs that have supported these kinds of projects.
I can go ahead with that. We have a lot of great examples. One way that other partner nonprofits have been involved is adopting certain areas themselves and sort of serving a similar role as a Forest Steward, and rallying their own members and followers to come out and do work. And so that might be an area where it overlaps with some of the trail work and things that you all do. So that's one opportunity. And then, helping to spread the word and educate folks and promote the programs and opportunities. Also, going together jointly on grants, it can be really great. Funders often like to see a wide array of folks coming together, such as this partnership. So I think grants are a lot stronger when we do it in partnership with other organizations. And then providing an educational component as well. So if there's a message that Issaquah Alps would like to share with the broader public around this kind of work, we can help again sort of cross-pollinate that. You'll have a Green Issaquah audience, and hopefully vice versa, you can share the message of the Green Issaquah Partnership with your audience as well. So those are some examples where we've partnered with other nonprofits on this work. And open to
Great,
others.
thank you.
Well. Yeah.
Great.
Thank you. Lindsay, Katie, I see you have a question. Would you like to ask your question, or would you like me to?
I can ask it. Yeah.
Great, thank you.
Hey, this is Katie Romine. I'm with Woodland Park Zoo, and we've been working with Issaquah on the Coexisting with Carnivores program the last couple of years. So, of course, I have a wildlife question, but I was just curious how either being a forest steward or just in general the monitoring after restoration or even before and during, does that include any wildlife monitoring in addition to the plant community monitoring, either in any of the current green cities or in Issaquah's plans?
Should I go on this one?
Sure.
So, well, it's not called out specifically as a component of within the guide, but it's certainly would be a wonderful opportunity to partner with organizations where that is the piece that they can offer. That's a great example of how we partnered with other nonprofits for the previous question. So, and then there's just been forest stewards and community groups that everybody comes at this work differently for different reasons. And some are out there because they love, you know, the wildlife component, the birding opportunities, and the habitat improvement. And so we've had a lot of forest steward groups where that's their passion. And so they have adopted additional wildlife surveys or monitoring or partnered with other groups to do that. So I think, again, similarly, that this is just a great opportunity to partner with that. I would think it would be a wonderful addition to collaborate with you all on showing how also the restoration work can improve habitat quality over time, and then providing that, again, that educational opportunity for folks that are coming out to volunteer events to learn more about the program that you all have. We love sharing the message at events and through our other publications and newsletters and things like that.
Great, thank you.
I'll actually add one item to that too, Joanna, is, you know, in the past, we've also worked with Ducks Unlimited, building wood duck houses in some of our open spaces. We've worked with scout troops, again, doing habitat houses for either bats or other small birds. So there's been some great opportunities to provide wildlife habitat in our open spaces by working with different volunteers on those projects also.
Yeah, and I'll just add, I mean, a great example has been working with the various Audubons and doing some of the bird surveys and things like that in conjunction on various restoration sites. And so we often collaborate with them as well.
Great, thanks. Great.
Thanks, Katie. Connie, I see you have a question.
Well, yes, I have a series of questions, so maybe I'll shotgun them and see how it goes. So some of the barriers to restoration in the past have been insurance nonprofits have been required to, in order to basically guide their own restoration projects, they had to maintain their own insurance to the tune of several $1 million for their insurance policy. So does this create a situation where the insurance is going to not be a burden on the nonprofits anymore, but it will be easily supplied by whatever this mechanism is, while still allowing a nonprofit to be a lead? And then question number 2 is, I remember Chris Bertolotto many years ago with basically the same pictures that you showed for the planting formation. And then I look at Mountains to Sound Greenway, who has sort of changed the way they plant to try to plant things that actually grow more easily, and then create a structure where you can plant underneath some shade for increased success. So who's responsible for the planting plans and types and the actual ability to get the plans, the plants themselves for planting, or the nonprofit's going to have to fundraise to get that done? Because I'm not really sure how that works in this mechanism. And then the two components connected, which is, is there some sort of calendar that is created for work parties that the city website would maintain, that a non-connected volunteer could say, hey, I have a thing, I don't know these people, but I need some time and I want to plant and I want to jump onto their party. And then a map that shows how all of these projects are connecting with one another to sort of duplicate and go to the wildlife enhancements, so that you could potentially be enhancing entire corridors as a focus, because our wildlife tends to follow our streams. And so we would have a multiplier if we could guide the focus of these enhancements in corridor projects, right? And so I'm not sure by what is presented how strong the organizational structure is. It feels a little bit like a collection of one-off projects that are just strictly, I want to do it, right? And so these are, you can see what I don't know. And I think that's the end of my shotgunning of questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Connie.
Thanks for the shotgun, Connie. I'll take the first portion of the shotgun in regards to insurance. Again, given the premise of this program is very much to enhance community-based support and community-based volunteerism within our city lands, that if that was a historical barrier, that will be removed as part of this program. Yes.
I can talk a little bit to the plants and planting plans. So we gave you, again, a pretty high level presentation of the data. There's a lot more fun data to dig into that we can look at on a park by park basis. But as a program, you know, the intent is, if the funding continues to be in place, that we will be providing forest stewards with plants for their projects. We would work closely with them to make sure that we develop a planting plan with them. That would be with the input from Matt and or anyone else involved on that particular site. But it is an opportunity for forest stewards to, get their to help direct some of that work. But we do work closely with folks on making sure that the planting approach is appropriate for that site. So I hope, so we'd work together on that. And we develop an annual plan with each forest steward as to sort of where they would work, what areas are priorities. We talked about some of the priorities, but also to get to, which is sort of that triage matrix. But in the guide, you'll also find that there is some other sort of another way of also looking at the habitat value. So it's not just if there's, if it's a salmon bearing stream, if there's just interest from a forest steward or community group, then we'll sort of work through that to set priorities for the program. And there will be a calendar. We're hopeful, we don't know yet, but there's a chance we might put this program onto a larger platform that we've used for some other green cities. It's called Cedar. It has a map of all the different parks. People can scan and see where there's different opportunities. And then the cool thing about that is that people hosting those events also then on the back end are reporting back. So they're saying, here's how many people did this work. Here's how much, how much plants were installed. So we get that reporting mechanism back. So we're really looking at the program across the whole city and what's moving forward. And I'd say that's really what the partnership is really helping to, like, not make it piecemeal, right? To make this a larger coordinated effort where the city and folks involved, everybody knows what's happening, and we're thinking more strategically about that based on the information that we have. As far as a map, sort of looking at things across corridors, I'd love to learn more about that. And what you were asking about that. But I hope I covered some of the questions.
That covered the, it's more flexible than just going for the potential people who want to do the thing in the potential color, but I'm still not reassured that it's going to be sensible, and then of course that the people who are doing the work are going to want to go back and maintain it. I'm not sure. That's always been one of the problems, is you get those teenagers excited and then they go to college. And then the trees, they languish and then they die on the hillside in Central Park, right? And the stakes are there, the trees are dead, but they're still counted as planted trees. And so that follow-up loop is opaque to me, but That's okay. So many things are opaque to me at this point in time that I'm just going to put myself on mute and see what other people have to say.
Well, I do think that's one of the points of tracking all the information. So what we've seen in some other programs is, yeah, we've had some forest stewards that sign up. They're pretty excited about the program. They do it for a couple years, but maybe they get a job or they have to move. But having this overarching program, we now know, okay, that planting happened there 3 years ago. This person has moved on, but now we need to find a new person for that project. Or if not, we need to maybe put some crew time on that. So the whole idea, exactly what you're describing, is really what this program is designed to help prevent. Because I've been around in restoration and seen what you're talking about myself. I've seen a lot of plantings that were sort of done and people walked away, go back to them, and if there's no maintenance and care, they're not successful. So it really is the intent to have that follow-up, and we hope that that's really one of the strengths of having the city adopt this program.
Yeah, if I can reinforce that really quick, Joanna, it's a great question, Connie. I think from the agency perspective, what you're asking is, I think, one of the core elements of this program and how it maybe reflects or creates something different than what has historically been done, right? Whereas we identify stewards so that these aren't just random volunteer projects that are happening, but it's really part of a bigger strategy. Is it perfect? No. But is it successful, and more successful than just randomly selected, hey, a volunteer really likes that site and let's go do one volunteer project and then what happens to it, right? Having these stewards as sort of anchors. And then as Joanna says, right, a steward may move or may fatigue or may not want to do it, but we have an area then that we can try and strategically identify another steward to take that over. So we hope, we think it's a step in the right direction, in a positive direction of taking some of that volunteer work that's been done over the decades and giving it a little more structure.
Great, thank you both. Tom has a question. This may be for Joanna and Jeff. Tom, did you want to read your question to the group, or would you like me to?
Sure, I'll go ahead and read it. So the state of Oregon has decided to ban the sale, propagation, and cultivation of English ivy. Bold move. Well, city of Issaquah considering any such move like that?
Great question, Tom. Thanks for reading the question. You've got a fantastic radio voice, by the way. So, boy, on our own, in isolation, I don't think that's something that's really been on our legislative agenda to this point. That's not to say it's not. I'm not going to speak on behalf of the electeds. I think the state of Oregon, seeing that they took a statewide approach, offering my 2 cents, I think a statewide approach would be far more successful than one city trying to do it by itself. Who's to say you can't buy the English ivy at XYZ garden store here in Issaquah, but boy, I just hop on over to Woodinville or somewhere else and get it. But it's intriguing. It's great to hear that Oregon's taken that approach, and perhaps that's something we want to take on a statewide level.
Yeah, well, I guess I would suggest that, yeah, it's impractical for one little old city to do such a thing in terms of the enforcement and all that, and people could find their way around it. But it's part of an educational outreach, I think, to really make progress long term on the invasive problem. Okay, people need to be educated more about the problem. And by making a law about such things, the ivy, that becomes a message, very powerful message that can help get through to people. People on this call, you probably all understand completely the problem But the general population doesn't understand the problem. I mean, I've been in people's backyards that have ivy, and then I start carrying on about how they need to rip that ivy out, and they don't know what I'm talking about. And so I give them a lecture, and then I never get invited back there again. Well, I'm joking a little bit, but this happens. People don't understand the problem and need education. So maybe to generalize my comment there about banning, well, all right. So there needs to be an educational element to the problem of invasive species as part of this overall program would be my suggestion.
Hear, hear. Education's a key part of it. And I see a shout out for Holly as well.
Ah, yes.
Not pro Holly, anti Holly.
So real quick, just time check. We are quickly approaching 7:30. We do have at least 2 more questions to get through. Dave Kapler, would you like to ask your questions?
Microphone blocked. Is that working, or am I unmuted? Temporarily, I guess. Okay. Thanks for the mention of carbon sequestration in the soil. That's an unrecognized one that we need to work on. HOAs are not the city's job to take care of, but they get stuck with a lot of steep slopes, wetlands, and the junk land the developers can't use. And they need some education on taking care of those. And the city has a role to require them to follow up on the commitments that came with those plats and agreements. But so hopefully we'll get some training through this process that can be used in those by the HOAs. Also, the Public Works Department owns some good land that I think they should be contributing some financial help, Jeff. Because they got ponds and land around ponds and other kind of oddball pieces of property, which potentially can be good habitat rather than just being mowed down right down to the ground. And we are going to see a chance for a plant salvage if the schools up on the plateau are approved. There's hopefully some big trees are going to go to Lake Sammamish State Park for their work in the creek. But there's going to be a whole bunch of sword ferns and some other smaller plants that would be a salvage event sponsored by this would be really ideal, I would think. Thank you.
Great, thank you for your comments, Dave. Anne, would you like to ask your question?
You bet.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm thinking about forest fire resilience, and I know just by making the forest more healthy, I think it'll probably be more resilient to forest fires. But I'm wondering if there's any new studies and/or practices to creating a more forest fire resistant forest aside from just making it more healthy. And if so, will you be following these practices?
Maybe Joanna, maybe I can take a more global city approach. Great question, Anne. And I think those best practices are continuously in development. I think as towns, cities have become more threatened and learning from some of these tragedies, if you will, we've aligned with Eastside Fire and Rescue. They've been we've actually had some conversations with them as we've been developing our 20-year guide. They're very, very enthusiastic about this program. And so I think that relationship, in some ways, forgive us, we didn't list them as a partner, but they are very enthusiastic about this program. And I think will be another key agency partner. And really, I think we can rely on them as experts in terms of what they're learning in terms of best practices, forest management, just as this program goes forw's for the
I'm
question.
curious, do you ever use them to cut dead trees down? There's I think Flagstaff uses their firefighters to cut dead trees down and create a healthy forest. I'm not sure if they'd be up for that, but it might be a way to save some money.
Maybe that's not something that has been done historically, but like I said, I think we're right on the front end of not only Eastside Fire and Rescue getting more educated and more informed of those practices, but I think they're going to be very interested again in educating us, right, in this program.
All right, thanks.
Yeah, I'll just add that I've been actually seeking out similar information, and I actually Dan might have more to add, but you know, I think it's an emerging management practices specifically for urban forests and how to manage urban forests for fire risk, and also in King County or in the sort of Puget Sound lowlands. They have not as traditionally been as high threat, but still thinking about what are some things that we can do when we manage our forests. So I know that's something that we've been looking at, asking and trying to get more information from Washington Department of Natural Resources and King County, because they've sort of been leading the efforts in this area on that. So the good news is we're in connection, and as far as the larger Green Cities Network, we're always sharing that information out amongst all the cities as we get it. But a lot of the information right now is geared towards homeowners and folks that live adjacent to the sort of urban sort of wildland interface, and what we can do to help just prevent that from happening in the first place.
Yeah, Joanna, the only thing I would add, I know, kind of looking more at the large scale landscape, not maybe the urban forest as much, is that the Cedar River watershed is doing a lot of research on ecological thinning in forest health. So looking at, thinning forest, what that has impacts on, like I said, water use of the forest, and mitigating fire impacts. So that might translate a little bit more to kind of our surrounding foothills than, the actual kind of valley bottom or some of our smaller city parks. But really interesting research there, looking at some of the benefits, across the board from selective thinning, which, if that was brought up maybe a few decades ago, would have been really controversial, and it still is to an extent. But yeah, there might be some interesting stuff. I'll be happy to connect if there's ways to look at, I don't know how much that is published versus stuff they're kind of working on currently, but they're actually looking at revising some of the regulations to do some of that thinning in the Cedar River watershed. So that's maybe a relevant example, but
I think King County is as well.
They're going through a lot of that as part of their 30-year update of their forest management plan too. So.
Great. With that, are there any last minute questions? We are just 4 minutes past 7:30, so thank you all for staying with us. If you have a comment, raise your hand. Otherwise, we'll let you know that the recording of tonight's presentation and the conversation will be posted on the City of Issaquah's webpage. I am again going to post the SurveyMonkey link in the chat. If you would like to participate and consider being a forest steward on our next round, please take that survey. It'll ask for some additional information prior to our next meeting. And of course, if you have any questions, Joanna in her the presentation had her email, but you can also email myself or Matt Meckler as city staff, and we're happy to connect you throughout this project. Again, towards the end of this year, first of next year, we will have the final Green Issaquah 20-year guide posted on the website for use and reference as we continue to do this work. So with that, thank you, Joanna, and to each and every one of you for joining us tonight.
Thanks for being part of this first meeting and launching this, everybody. Really appreciate it. Great discussion. Thanks.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good night.
Thanks, everyone.